Captain, the minds of the Chinjesu are closed to the rejoining. They must be awakened. Our Psi team says it will take a burst of psychic energy far more powerful than we can muster. The Chinjesu must be mind-controlled to awaken, so they rejoin with the Mernmerm and rehybridize the Chimur. Yes, sir.
Hello again, courageous Captain. We stand ready to assist you in any way we can. What can we provide? We can try. There is extensive damage to their minds. Their minds are so alien, but we can reach them. Come back, Chenjesu. Come back to the land of light and color. They are revived. They are very weak and cannot speak, but they're conscious. What can we do for you? Until next time, Captain.
Avowal. Human from Earth. About.
Captain, we have found this, well, it's a small blue-gray mountain. Sensors detect the same kind of energy readings we get from the Claire Conclave, but to the nth degree. It's talking, or rather, it's transmitting a powerful signal that our translators can decipher. It's calling out for its children, the Claire Conclave. I think this mountain is the Claire Conclave Queen. It's calling for her children to rescue her from this cold and lonely place. That's about all we can make out. We can't begin to budge this mountain. The only thing we can move is a strange light blue rock we found near the Queen, about the size of a baseball. Some kind of oval rock we've never seen. It sheds small blue flakes. Our scanners read it as having a physical structure slightly similar to the Claire Conclave, but it doesn't register as being a living creature like the mountain. Yes, sir.
puny League of Sentiment races, the mighty Thude Katang will obliterify you from the universe! More of your human tricks and deceptification? Your concerns are not significant to the Katang. Ha! Mighty enough to crushify you!
ICOM online. Perhaps it would prove effective to offer to purchase the duped. The Katang seem to be behind Perhaps it would prove effective to offer. The Katang seem to be behind this incredible. ICOM offline.
puny league of sentiment races, the mighty Thud Katang will obliterify you from the universe! More of your The Claire Conkles do everything their queen said, so we capturated their big mountain queen. The Dak-Tak-Clack-Clack mind-controlled the queen into telling the Claire Conkler to obey the crux. We got her onto Warp Station Clash Cog before the mind control could wear off. That was hard. Many Katang were crushified before we finished. We have tried to demolish her, but so far, no good. Can this informant help you get the Claire Conkles out of the crux? It's in the... Never! You are trying to discover Katang's secrets! Just do it, alien.
Oh no, not again. Can it be true? The Conch Rock. We must have it. The Conch Rock comes directly from the Queen. It is the source of all new Claire Conkler. We cannot continue our species without the Conch Rocks. Only the Crux have been able to find Conch Rocks in this quadrant. We must have that Conch Rock. The Claire Conkler. Thank you, human. No.
Captain, we have found this, well, it's a small blue-gray mountain. Sensors detect the same kind of energy readings we get from the Claire Conkler. But to the nth degree, it's talking, or rather, it's transmitting a powerful signal that our translators can decipher. It's calling out for its children, the Claire Conkler. I think this mountain is the Claire Conkler Queen. It's calling for her children to rescue her from this cold and lonely place. That's about all we can make out. We can't begin to budge this mountain. The only thing we can move is a string. Our scanner... Whatever you say.
Oh no. We must. Oh, you know.
ICOM online. Perhaps it would prove effective to... Perhaps it would prove effective. ICOM off. Sir, League news source. There are evidently two powerful political factions. ICOM offline.
Huh? boy.
Captain of the League. May your mission
Observation. Explanation. Ongoing search for cure. Assertion 1. Search for cure equals inconclusive. Assertion 2. Without cure, Harika become more brutal fighters, plus more willing to die for Crux. Conclusion. Search for cure may remain inconclusive. Directive. Transmission terminated. Observation. Observation.
Hi, Cap. How can we help? Talk to you soon, Cap.
Observation. Observation.
go to our... I am...
Expanding.
Oars must grab the...
Old toy.
Never for...
Campers.
But for oars I am sure. All happy...
Campers.
Must come together for...
Party time.
With...
Friend. Old toy.
Is for...
Friend.
The oars...
Smell.
The siren...
Nasty trick.
Too much. But...
Campers.
Can't...
Smell.
So the oars...
Fit.
The...
Sick colors.
Of the siren to happy...
Campers.
So are aware of their secret. I am clear. Do not ignore or it is bad. Yes, we do.
Sir, League news sources report that Urquan forces ICOM
Captain of the League of... The Chronicle of the Urquan is a history of the greatest triumphs and deepest regrets. We nearly enslaved or exterminated all the races of our home quadrant, as Urquan fought Urquan in the vicious doctrinal wars. In retrospect, our tragedy could have been foreseen in our origins. The Urquan evolved as solitary hunters on a hostile world, and we quickly became the dominant predator on the planet. The only threat to us came from other Urquan. Civilization did not come easily to us. We earned it by mastering the fierce territoriality and murderous desires that nearly obliterated our species in wars fought with crude clubs and wars fought with atomic weapons. But we survived our own hatreds and formed a cooperative planetary culture. This level of achievement allowed us to explore our own solar system in atomic-powered ships. Then we met the Tallow. In our xenophobia and paranoia, we attacked on sight. In spite of our reckless aggression, the Tallow had glacial patience. A lesser race would have blasted us back to the Stone Age, or exterminated us before we could spread to the stars. Instead, they offered us membership in their confederation, called the Sentient Milieu. We again conquered the hunting beast within us to become a starfaring race and cooperative members of the Milieu. The Tallow were a slow, serene, quiet race. Of all the species we have met, only the Tallow did not trigger our instinctive territoriality. They were the only people we could talk to without the hunter inside us screaming, "Kill the interloper, rip out its life." We believed that their rock-like, silicon-based biology was the vital factor that made the Tallow seem non-threatening to us. Whatever the reason, they cared about the Urquan and respected our potential when all other races saw only a brutal enemy to be destroyed. With their unconditional acceptance and devoted guidance, we grew into a proud and mighty race. They were the only species we ever called friend. And then, we met the Dynyari. Nearly 25,000 Earth years ago, our home quadrant birthed the greatest confederation of starfaring races ever known. The Sentient Milieu existed to provide a safe haven for emerging sentient species. It governed itself with an enlightened respect for all species, much like your League of Sentient Races. The 6 founding races were the Tallow, the Draw, the Faz, the Maelnoom, the Yuli, and the Yuktar. They even found a place for the Urquan, who could not tolerate the presence of other sentient beings. The Tallow championed our membership and ameliorated the trouble we caused. We became scouts and solitary explorers for the milieu. We proved our worth over and over again, defending the milieu from slavers and dictators. We are excellent fighters because we do not fear death. We know that if we do our duty, in our next life, we will be reborn as another Urquan. Our association with the Tallow and the milieu lasted for 3,000 years. 3,000 of the brightest years in the painful and tormented history of the Urquan. 3,000 years until the day of the Dynyari. On a routine planetfall, we discovered some anomalous energy readings, a sign of precursor installations. There, we met a race of bloated, evilly intelligent toad-like creatures called the Dynyari. They possessed ghastly psychic powers to control the minds of other sentient beings, and they wanted to rule the entire universe. They enslaved our minds and forced us to transport them to the milieu's capital world. The insidious war for dominance was quick and nearly bloodless. Within weeks, the Dynyari had psychically dominated 6 of the 7 races in the sentient milieu, but they could not control the Tallow. We suspect that the same unusual rock-like biology that made the Tallow seem non-threatening to the Urquan also gave the Tallow natural immunity to the Dynyari's psychic compulsion. But the Tallow had no immunity. The Tallow refused to take up arms against us and were slaughtered. To our eternal shame, we committed genocide, burning them from the face of the galaxy. The Dynyari were evil, hateful, depraved creatures from a world they called Blilandi. We don't know how they got their mental powers, or why a race with such powerfully advanced minds was isolated on one planet. We know little about them, save that they were the greatest menace the galaxy has ever known. For thousands of years, we were unthinking slaves to the Dynyari, carrying out their every depraved command. Like the 5 other surviving races of the old milieu, we had no choice but to obey. The Dynyari's compulsion was too strong to resist. The Dynyari said the Urquan were their favored slaves because we were so easily compelled, but we prefer to think that we were simply the most mentally sensitive. We were forced to destroy those races which did not serve with the efficiency and speed demanded by the Dynyari. They decided that the Yuli and the Draw were inferior. They instructed us to incinerate their worlds, and we did. The once great sentient milieu degenerated into nothing more than a great galactic prison camp. But when the Dynyari sought to manipulate the Urquan genes, they brought about their own downfall. The Dynyari were not content just to exploit our bodies and corrupt our minds. They blasphemously defiled the very soul of our race by toying with the priceless genetic codes that created us. Using ancient precursor technology, they ruptured the Urquan into 2 sub-races. They created the Green Urquan to be administrators and planners, and they made the Black Urquan to be warriors and builders. Our species would never be the same again. A brilliant Green Urquan researcher named Kazurza made the cataclysmic discovery that led to the violent overthrow of the Dynyari slave empire. Black and Green Urquan joined together and fought their oppressors. But galaxy-spanning empires do not fall easily. The war raged on for years, years of ceaseless agony. We allied with races like the Faz, an old ally from the sentient milieu. Finally, the great Urquan slave revolt was won, but in our jubilation over our great victory, we sowed the seeds of a greater downfall. Kazurza had been commanded to study the severe mental trauma caused by long-term exposure to the Dynyari's psychic compulsion. Kazurza knew that when a slave died, the Dynyari who controlled the slave had to rapidly disconnect from the slave's mind, or the Dynyari would die as well. But Kazurza discovered that the Dynyari also temporarily disconnected when the slave experienced extreme, nearly lethal pain. Kazurza entered a state of excruciating pain, and in a moment of freedom, broadcast this secret to the entire universe. In all parts of the Dynyari slave empire, the Urquan gashed open their own bodies, burned themselves, hurled themselves into jagged heaps of scrap metal, anything to purchase the few precious seconds of freedom necessary to grab the nearest Dynyari and crush the bleeding creature to jelly. This primitive mortification of the body gave way to more sophisticated tactics. Alas, Kazurza did not survive to see the day that the Urquan perfected a ghoulish torture device called the Excruciator. They inserted the Excruciator directly into their own brains, where it unleashed an unending stream of agony, which released them from the grip of the hated Dynyari. The gutless slavers squeamishly recoiled from the minds of the Urquan and were slaughtered. We butchered most of the Dynyari, but made the mistake of leaving some alive to serve as our translators. Exterminating the Dynyari was not punishment enough to satisfy the Urquan, who had suffered enslavement, biogenetic degradation, and years of screaming pain. A slow death was too kind a fate for such monsters. The combined Urquan starfleets decided to inflict a vicious form of poetic revenge upon the Dynyari. We genetically modified them. We gutted their minds, turning them into subsentient, dumb animals. That way, they could never again dominate our minds, and we could stop using the excruciators. And then we further degraded these once omnipotent creatures by forcing them to serve as our translators. They became our talking pets. After the horrors of the Dynyari slave empire, the Urquan had become more xenophobic than ever. We considered all other races so grossly inferior that merely speaking directly to another race was a revolting act. We used our talking pets to do that dirty job. We had won the Urquan slave revolt and were the preeminent power in the galaxy. After years of mind-wrenching agony, we refused to ever be enslaved again. But our racial divisions were deep, and we could not cooperate on this goal. In our paranoia, we split into two subspecies factions and created two conflicting doctrines designed to ensure our freedom. We Green Urquan now called ourselves the Kazurza, in honor of the Urquan who triggered the revolt. The Black Urquan called themselves the Kora, in honor of the charismatic fleet officer who commanded them. Neither faction would embrace the doctrine of the other faction, and so we fought another long and bloody war, this time against each other. The Green Kazurza established the path of now and forever, a doctrine which required all other sentient species to serve as our slaves or have their planets forever imprisoned beneath impenetrable force shields. The Black Kora found this plan too complicated and marred by the same error that brought down the Dynyari, the mistake of allowing potential enemies to live. They created a simpler alternative. Their eternal doctrine called for the systematic eradication of all sentient life in the universe, all except the Urquan. Before we could stop them, they cleansed the homeworld of the Yuptar, destroying yet another milieu race. We protected the milieu race called the Fads beneath an impenetrable slave shield, and stopped the Kora before they could destroy the planet of the last remaining free race, the Male Noom. We challenged them, and as we fought, the Male Noom slipped away. We were never able to find the Male Noom again, but it did not matter. We had matters of far greater import before us. The first great doctrinal war had begun. Our doctrinal war raged for decades and ravaged worlds that had barely begun to recover from the horrors of the Dynyari slave empire. The two Urquan subspecies careened down the path to mutually assured destruction when the Green Kazurza discovered a precursor battleship. This massive vessel, which we called the Samatra, was infinitely more powerful than any ship ever seen before. It sliced through the Korra forces in just a few days and defeated them utterly. But we Kazurza were humble in victory and allowed our Korra relatives to live. Besides, we were no longer convinced that our doctrine was superior to theirs. We decided to put both doctrines to the test in opposite halves of the galaxy and determine which was superior. We exiled the tattered Korra fleet to travel in a direction that went against the spin of the galaxy, while we traveled in the other direction. When the Urquan would meet again, we would fight in ritual combat. The superior doctrine would prevail, and that faction would control the precursor battleship. If the Eternal Doctrine proved strong enough to let the Korra rebuild their shattered strength and actually defeat us, we would stand aside and let them kill every sentient being in the galaxy. Many millennia later, the two Urquan factions met in a large area centered near the Craterus constellation to fight the second and final doctrinal war. The Korra were armed with the resources of the many races they had exterminated. The Kazurza were aided by 8 great races arranged in a rigid hierarchy, which we called the Hierarchy of Battle Thralls. Our war was going splendidly until you appeared on the scene. The hierarchy consisted of 9 starfaring races, including the Urquan. The Androsynth were genetically manipulated clones of your race, human. They mysteriously disappeared before the end of the Second Great Doctrinal War. The Ilrath are a race of peace-hating, highly religious, spider-like creatures who were fanatically devoted to their gods, Dogar and Kazan. They were one of the strongest of the battle thralls until you deceived them into attacking one of our other races, the arrogant, brutal Thradish, using a hyperwave caster you took from another of our races, the Unga. The Unga are blobbish, multi-eyed creatures that relied on biomechanical hybridization for their technology. All these races have now been pacified by you and your allies. The Vux and the Mycon were also pacified, but agreed to give up conquest and join your expedition here to the Kasari Quadrant. The Spathi and Yeehaut left the hierarchy during the war to become your allies. They are also part of this expedition, though the Yeehaut have since merged with the Pakunk and are now part of the Pakunk race. We imprisoned many worlds to save them from the horrors of the Eternal Doctrine. One of these worlds was your planet, Earth. We did not know that a colony of Earthlings had left the planet and crash-landed on Unzerbalt, an undiscovered precursor planet. Evidently you were born there, grew up with precursor artifacts for play toys, and found you had an affinity for the powerful devices. You were able to create a precursor ship and use its power to unify many enslaved and shattered races into a formidable alliance. You were able to find the one remaining sentient Dynyari that still had its compulsion powers, as well as a hatred for the Urquan. And you found the mind shield that the Tallow had built to save us from the Dynyari. You cleverly employed all these things to approach and blow up the Urquan Samatra battleship. Both the Kazurza and the Korra were crushed, and neither doctrine prevailed. It was as if the Tallow had reached across the eons to smite the Urquan, their genocidal protégés. The remaining Korra refused to surrender. They were taken into custody by your alliance and remanded to our care. The remaining Kazurza surrendered, realizing that neither doctrine was correct. All Urquan gave up our reliance on the Dynyari to translate for us, and now speak directly. You did not destroy either faction of Urquan, and representatives of Green Urquan came along on the expedition to demonstrate our new status as functioning members of the League. Even though there are Korra observers in our expedition, we brought none of their marauder ships to the Kasari Quadrant. Daily contact with the Korra reminds us of the great punishment we must bear. The unnatural genetic division of green and black Urquan remains to this day, causing no end of sorrow and distress for us. We feel palpable pain to look upon an opposing member of our divided species. Our race will never be whole again, and there may be no hope for the two factions but to partition our species forever. Yes, the Dreadnought is a prime fighting vessel. It is the most powerful ship known in our home quadrant. The only ship to rival it in sheer firepower was the Korra Marauder. Of course, that doesn't count one-of-a-kind precursor vessels like your old one, or your new one. The Dreadnought has an immensely powerful medium to long-range weapon that fires rapid fusion plasma blasts. But its strongest feature is its ability to launch autonomous fighters. The fighters each contain valuable crew members, so try not to abandon them in space. Make certain not to command the Dreadnought to launch all its fighters, or you risk leaving the Dreadnought vulnerable to a lucky enemy strike. Also, make sure not to command the ship to engage in a high-speed tactical retreat while the fighters are still harrying the foe, or the fighters will expire in space. Remember, this ship was designed by Urquan, and Urquan are unfamiliar with retreat. We seek to serve. May your mission meet with the greatest success.